This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Judith Belmont. And I welcome you to the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
So before we get to the heart of your story, we always ask the guests if we talk to you a couple questions. What motivates you, and why do you do what you do?
Well, I was a psychotherapist for over 40 years. I'm retired now, although I do some mental health coaching online. And writing my books, I've written 11 books and 2 therapeutic card decks, as well as I've done a lot of mental health speaking. It just evolved from my work in the field, and I really got great feedback, and I love it. And the more knowledge I have, the more I want to share. So it just evolved. I didn't know how it was going to evolve, but it just evolved that way.
So you're the author of 11 self-help books. So that's really, so have you been doing, working as an author in the last couple of years? Is that something you've always been doing?
Well, so about 20 years ago, a little less, maybe 18 years ago, I was a speaker for other therapists to get continuing ed credits from PESI, who is, I think, the biggest mental health continuing ed provider in the country. And at that time, they were launching book publishing. And that's how I kind of fell into the book publishing. And so that's why I wrote so many books. I never actually thought of writing a book at all, to tell you the truth. But because I already did like workplace wellness, stress management, communication speaking, I thought that would be an interesting way to speak also. And it led me into writing books. And then once my books were out, then New Harbinger contacted me, and W.W. Norton and Callisto Printing, and it kind of evolved from there. But my latest book, which is 110 CBT Tips and Tools, is from the original publisher, PESI. Mm-hmm. And they do a great job in getting the books out there, and they were delightful to work with.
So I'm going to ask, like, what does CBT stand for?
Yeah, it's good. I'm glad you asked that, because I would have told you anyway. So CBT stands for Cognitive Behavior Therapy, and it is the most widely adopted therapeutic orientation in the world. And so it's not just an offshoot kind of brand of therapy. It is what most people incorporate in their practice. And basically, the premise of CBT is the quality of your thoughts determine the quality of your life. And if you think clearly, you're going to feel good and grounded, and you're going to make good behavioral choices. If you think in unhealthy ways, for instance, with cognitive distortions, that's one of the hallmarks of CBT, is identifying the thought habits that make you anxious, depressed, cause problems, and then learn skills. CBT has a lot of different techniques and skills to actually change the way that you think, because you can't tell yourself, oh, I shouldn't be sad. If you're sad, you're sad. But what I ask my clients is, what thoughts are going through your mind that's causing you to feel sad? And normally they'll say, I don't know, initially. And then after they kind of get into the groove with me, they say, well, I think that my life will never come together. I've never really been able to be successful. Like, they will say things, and then I write it down, and then I'll repeat it to them. I said, is that a narrative that you tell yourself, or is that actually fact? Is it fact or fiction? And a lot of people don't realize a lot of things they tell themselves, if they're depressed or they're negative or anxious or low self-esteem, they don't realize that they're telling themselves things that they take as fact, but it's not true. Oh, I'm too sensitive. Well, is that a fact or fiction? That's a judgment. That is a narrative. That's not necessarily true. I have difficulty in talking to people at times. Yes, that can be factual. So I help people reframe. It's called cognitive reframing, and changing the way that you think so that you actually have more control over it. And then you feel better, and then your behavioral choices will be better also.
So you kind of like remapping, like, well, in my day job, I'm in software design, and
Wow.
we do a lot of things in the computers. We do what we call structural changes and non-structural changes, right? And so, like structural changes, like you got to change the core of a foundation of something, and then non-structural change, you're just changing the values within something, right? Like a table, and you change a value, add
Well,
a
I guess that's what I'm doing in terms of the mind.
yeah. It sounds like I was trying to find a parallel. It sounds similar.
That's a great parallel, actually.
So it's interesting that people can actually reprogram their mindset from like having like these maybe limiting beliefs to more expansive, like that you if you're
Exactly.
yeah.
Most people don't realize they have self-limiting beliefs. That's just the way they think.
Mhm.
And that's actually called in CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, ants, automatic negative thoughts. We have to get rid of those pesky ants in our head
Mm.
and get rid of them, change them, step on them, whatever, instead of just thinking that this is true. So there's CBT and some of the offshoots, excuse me,
Yeah.
some of the offshoots of CBT, such as ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, and DBT, dialectic behavior therapy, they also have a lot of hands-on skills using CBT, but expanding on it. So I'll give you an example. If I think I'm an idiot, I'm a loser. Let's say you say something that people didn't take well in a meeting, or you felt like you didn't express yourself well. Oh, I'm a terrible communicator. One way of defusing your thought from your head and not make it so automatic is to develop what's called an observing head, where you look at your thoughts, but like on a cloud or on a stream, with like leaves on a stream, or maybe a train that you're looking over from the bridge. So you distance yourself and you look at the negative thoughts instead of from the negative thoughts.
Mm.
So you might say, there I go again, thinking I'm a loser, and imagine it on a big blackboard, distancing yourself, observing it, rather than I'm a loser.
Yeah, so you just like it's kind of like, wow, I'm a Buddhist, and our thinking is like affirmation. So if we chant that we're gonna have a good day, and we don't say we're gonna be a loser today, right? We're gonna have a really positive, beautiful day, and we start our day kind of chanting and putting ourselves in that mindset. Well, guess what? That day tends to go that way.
Well, you know what? Positive affirmations is one of my tips in my book, and I have them in really all my books. Positive affirmations are really important because they're reminders of our worth. Because so often we don't realize that we're just as worthy as the day we were born. A lot of people feel like they're damaged, they're flawed. I had this woman many years ago, but it kind of struck me, and I remember she, before my coffee table, she had her hand way up here, and she said, I've had this many failures and I can't afford one more.
Mm.
And I said, wow, that's a lot of failures. And I said, what were they? And I thought she was going to give me a list. She thought of two things, two mistakes or two things that she didn't like.
Raise
And
that
to
level.
her, it determined her whole existence. And so what CBT does is change the narrative, have positive affirmations so that you are going to think more realistically and not in all or nothing ways of thinking, or telling the future, such as, oh, I'll never get it together. Well, how do you know that?
Yeah.
I'll never love again. I'll never forget. I had a girl when I was just my second job out of graduate school. She This is way before cell phones. This is in the early 1980s. She ran in front of a car after her boyfriend broke up with her. So she thought my boyfriend broke up with me. It made me run in front of a car. Well, guess what? Situations don't make you do anything. It's your thoughts that are in the middle. She was saying, I'll never love again. That's really things she told me. She was all of like 17 or 18. He was the only one for me. I'm nothing without him. Well, a month later, through therapy and also life experience, she had another boyfriend. But
Yeah.
at the time, she didn't think her life was worth living. So sometimes people don't realize unless they have some help. It's one thing to say, oh, that's irrational, but how do you actually change it? And
Right.
that's what CBT does. You have logs, you have diaries, you dissect the irrational thought, you identify the distortion, you replace it with a more positive thought, then you grade your feelings in terms of happy or anxious and give it a number. There's a lot of different techniques that can have people learn the how-tos of changing the way they think.
It seems like a lot of people they're looking for perfection. And a lot of times as an artist, perfection's is like the enemy of creativity. Like a lot of times the happy accident and as a musician, like you're always learning if you're open and you realize that sometimes the perfect track is not the track you actually use. The track that actually has my errors and timing, key changes, or it's not the perfect like example that could actually fit the tone of what you're trying to do. And so it kind of can be a lesson that there's no bad note, there's an opportunity. And
Absolutely. And that's what's called having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. A growth mindset is I learned from it. It didn't work out as well as I thought. I'm going to try this. Whereas a fixed mindset is I didn't do good. I'm not good at what I do. I'm not talented and I just give up. So when people have a growth mindset, they're generally a lot happier, even if they're not as outwardly successful, because they allow themselves to grow and evolve.
because like what you don't know is an opportunity instead of being a detriment, right? Like I'm a cancer survivor, so every day that once I learned, that I survived it, like every day being here was like a blessing. It versus like somebody could say, "Well, today's so terrible," but if you have come from like an illness that could be terminal and you survive it, every
Absolutely.
day is an opportunity. And so
Well,
sometimes you don't want to have that crucible moment happen to make you decide that. But if it can help you, it helps you. So I
it's
found that the
it's
cancer did help.
amazing. It's amazing how I've heard of people who had traumas of different type, such as a serious diagnosis, and um, it actually often helps people improve their lives because it gets things in perspective, and they are filled with a lot more gratitude for the life they had. I mean, I know I personally had a health scare and I am fine, but there was a test and another test, and finally, we found out I'm okay. Nothing really major, but I'm actually even more grateful now than I was 2 months ago before that whole thing started.
Mhm.
Because, we all know we're mortal, but it's another thing to actually face that there could be something very serious.
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes I know when I had the cancer diagnosis, there were people around me when I was 27, and some people just fell off. And were there people I didn't expect that would fall off, and
Really?
then people who stayed with me that I didn't expect would stay with me. And so
Wow.
it was interesting that some people didn't like the idea of like their friend having something that could be like the mortality of it. So they couldn't face it. And I didn't realize that they were a person like that until it happened.
Wow.
And so it's just interesting to me that it kind of revealed the world in a way that wouldn't have seen it that way. I wouldn't have seen that person would have done that, and I wouldn't have seen this other
Wow.
person would stay with me. So I was like, wow, it's like it's kind of been this kind of it's
Wow.
light shining on something, showing me something.
Very, very interesting.
But in terms of like different techniques within CBT you've talked about. Your book said there's 110, and we probably don't want to go through all 110.
Oh, no.
But
We
but
would
but
need a
there's
lot
like,
more time than the time we
yeah,
have.
yeah, we want them to get the book too. You don't want to tell
Oh,
give
that's
them
right.
away the secret sauce. But
That is
like,
very
what
good.
are some of the some key things that we've talked maybe not gotten into so far from
Okay.
that 110?
Well, one very mainstream type of technique is called coping cards. It sounds very simple, but they are really very helpful for people if they're feeling very anxious or they're depressed. When you lose perspective, having coping cards such as affirmations we talked about before, or when I get anxious or when I'm afraid of speaking up in the meeting, I will, and have a menu of what you're going to do. Basically, reminders for you so that you have some structure to what you anticipate could be a difficult situation. So, coping cards have been found to be extremely effective as reminders to calm people down when they are emotionally charged. Another one is to differentiate something simple, I'll give you, between a thought and a feeling. Now, you might think, well, who doesn't know the difference between a thought and a feeling? Most people don't. So I'll give you an example. Someone said to me about a year ago, and it stuck in my head. He said, I feel like you're criticizing me, because he was actually very, being very difficult to this organization I was in. And so I just said, what do you think's going on? He said, well, I don't know. I feel like you're criticizing, just 'cause I was questioning it. And I'm thinking, that wasn't a feeling, that was a thought.
Yeah.
He felt upset. He felt on guard. He felt angry or defensive because he thought I might be judgmental.
Hmm.
So when you separate a thought and a feeling, you have more power, because you can't say don't be hungry or don't be sad, but you can't change the thought. So if you, in everyday life, if you or other people say things like, oh, she stresses me out, guess what? That's irrational. So CBT techniques help you differentiate what's healthy thinking and unhealthy thinking. Why is it unhealthy? Now, we're not talking about criminal behavior and physically punching someone. Yeah, someone can actually hurt you, but and we're not talking about abuse, with like children or whatever. But in adult communication, if you say, she stresses me out, that's impossible. I am stressed when I am with her. That's taking responsibility versus I'm a victim. So
Yeah.
you decide if you're a victim or a victor. And a lot of times people think in very victim language. They
Yeah.
think that other people are making them upset. She made me so upset. She made me cry. Guess what? We make ourselves what happens between our ears. Maybe we're triggered, but we need to look at those triggers and get the seeds of resiliency more in our forefront rather than blaming someone else. That would be
Yes.
an example of a cognitive distortion.
I think there seems to be a lot of what's at least going on in the States right now with people who look at the other and think that the other is actually causing them distress, right?
Absolutely.
So they'll say a whole class of people
Yep.
is like, if they are not around, then I'm going to feel better. Or if they can't have this, then I'm like, well, what's that have to do with you?
Well, you know what? There's a lot of irrational thinking in this world. And when people are stressed and there's a lot of negativity, it's highlighted. And it's kind of scary because you don't want to run your life with such irrationality. So, another technique in CBT is dissecting what's A, B, and C. A is an act or an event. Let's say you know someone well, and that person walks by you without saying anything. C is the consequence, which is your feelings and your behavior. Did that person not say anything make you angry, make you concerned, make you feel rejected? No. What's that B in the middle that actually makes or breaks how you respond? And that is your belief, your perception. If you think, oh, what a snob, he thinks he's too good for me, you'll be angry. But if you interpret your B, your belief, oh, he must be so lost in thought. I hope he's okay. You would be concerned and not upset. So your reactions are really happening from the B, your belief, your thoughts, not really a situation. Now we're not talking about life-threatening illnesses or something like that, but
Mhm.
but even then, some people handle it more gracefully than others.
Oh, yeah, in school, I took sociology and the study of, like, groups and what we see in, like, group dynamics, like macrocosm versus microcosm.
Mhm.
And in terms of, like, the dynamics going on today, people seem to be giving up some sense of freedom for, like, totalitarian type of concepts.
Yeah.
So in order to make things easier, that I don't have to take responsibility, I'll give power to this person so that they can do it rather than me having to do it or think about it.
Well, I think what also happens is you get kind of if people are really sure of themselves, people end up believing them. And that can be kind of scary because then you're not going to have critical thinking.
Yeah.
And so we end up going along, even though it doesn't maybe make much sense.
It seems like we're going against the Enlightenment, like the rigor of the Socratic method of people having critical thinking, of asking a question. We're now potentially asking a question, you should be banned or you should be kept from the algorithm if you ask a question or if you have a point of view that goes against this point of view, then you can't be heard. And so that to me is like, okay, well, how do you navigate that? Because that's not just you. There's structures out there that are preventing like free speech. So how do you handle that?
I think it's really scary. And I try to live the life that I want to live and be the person that I want to be, which is a person who wants to be kind and grateful and forgiving and inclusive. And that's all we can do, really. You
Mhm.
know, we can't change how other people think. And actually, when people try to change other people's minds, that's the definition of conflict in an argument. So, one of the things that I have in the book is how to be assertive. Use I statements instead of you statements. I don't feel comfortable with that rather than why are you being so nosy? You know, one would be kind of blaming someone else, and the other was, "I'm not comfortable sharing something so personal."
Mhm.
But we can only take responsibility for ourselves and try to do the best we can, even though maybe sometimes it isn't accepted or received as well as we would like.
Yeah, I guess in terms of like societal expectations of being in a kind of a civil society, like you can only take care of yourself, but if you're in a group behavior can lead to group decisions and group things. So you can only control so much of what you can do, but like a law of attraction, negativity kind of breeds negativity, positivity breeds positivity.
For us. And when people are not so healthy and they're hurting, they're more likely to go along with stuff because they don't have a core inner strength. When people really know who they are, and well, some people know who they are, but maybe they have different values that are not really humanitarian, or they might be very discriminatory, for example. Um, but I think that the real important thing is to be your moral compass.
Mhm.
And, you know, you can't you can't change things that are out of your control, but if you are assertive, you can stand up for what you believe in. with I statements. I don't feel comfortable with that, rather than you statements. You shouldn't be doing that, or you shouldn't, that's being very judgmental. Even like questions like, what were you thinking? That's actually not a question. It's a rhetorical question, which is a put down. A lot
Hmm.
of times people use rhetorical questions, and it's basically a criticism. So no matter how off you think people are, it's best to refrain from uh, rhetorical questions, because they're really put downs, and that's just really rude. Just because someone's rude to you doesn't mean you have to be rude back. You can use I statements. I don't feel comfortable with how you're talking to me.
So a lot of times, it seems like the individual, like looking glass self, understanding like where you are is where you can take the most action, because like you're saying, you can't really control other people, but a lot of times people aren't even aware of their own like looking glass self.
You know what? I mean, I've had different clients say this, but I'm thinking of one in particular that she was very upset about, feeling certain ways. And she said, I know I shouldn't be feeling this way. And I said, you have a right to your feelings. You have a right to feel any way you want. And she looked at me, and she was about a 45-year-old woman. It's not like she was like a teenager. And she looked at me, she says, really? Like this was such a novel concept to her that she had a right to her feelings. So, one thing that I teach people, and is also in all my books, is to identify your basic human rights, such as I have a right to make mistakes. I have a right not to know everything. I have a right to my feelings. But you also have a corresponding responsibility to allow other people to also make mistakes and be a work in progress.
Yeah,
And
so I think,
sometimes
yeah,
that helps people to be more assertive.
yeah, being assertive, like a lot of times the people are kind of stuck in that maybe childhood trauma of not being given like any kind of sense of self determination. If they were in a situation where they were like overly controlled, then they
Exactly.
don't feel they have a right to make their own decisions. So they may have actually gotten into their career, they're in their life dictated by what they were told is the right thing, rather than
Right.
what they actually feel is the right thing.
Exactly. So there's a certain time when you figure out who is the board of directors in my head, and do I want to get rid of some of them? Do I really want them to be on the board anymore? Because maybe they didn't know better. People don't intentionally treat people dysfunctionally. Everybody tries their hardest. In my many years as a therapist, I've never met anybody who actually wanted to cause havoc in someone's life. They really meant well. It's just that they're misguided. They have their own pain they're working through, and they're limited by their own self-limiting beliefs.
Hmm.
So some of growing through trauma is to forgive people for not giving you what they never had to give in the first place. Like you can't get milk at a hardware store.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people think they should be able to get things from people because they should have been that way. And I would say to my clients, well, okay, how tall is your dad? 5'10". Do you get upset with him that he's not 6 feet? No, he's 5'10". Well, it's just some people don't have it in them to be differently because they don't know anything differently.
They,
And that's what's nice about CBT and other types of therapy, such as ACT and DBT, which is dialectic behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, which gives skills to actually deprogram and defuse those automatic negative thoughts, those ants you have in your brain.
so some people are just emotionally unavailable and they just don't have that tool set.
Absolutely. Some people have had trauma, and there's all types of trauma. It doesn't have to be abuse. It could be, doesn't have to be neglect. It could be incompatibility of personality styles. It could be, many things. Maybe not treated well by kids at school, or, critical people. And there's so many different ways. And it does seem like we have what's called the negativity bias, that we're more affected by negative things than positive things. They stick with us more.
Yeah, it seems like the algorithms and the ether of the net focus on the negative things, and they get the most views, the most likes.
Yeah.
And so then it kind of creates a cycle. And if you've got like a lot of young people that's their primary interaction, or even people, in any age, get triggered or get pulled into these loops of
Yeah.
this redundant loops of continuing the same behavior, or having
They
people in
don't
those
they don't
circles.
know any better.
Yeah, they're
They
just
they
feeding on
don't have the
themselves.
skills. It's like, you don't expect, you know, if you've never learned French, you can't expect yourself to start speaking French unless you learn French. You know,
Mhm,
we need, it's like I tell my clients, it's like learning Pig Latin. Maybe you learned Pig Latin when you were younger. It's like a nonsense language with a lot of shoulds and judgments, and you're worthless and you're never going to make anything of yourself. Okay, that's extreme, but people have grown up that way. That's like emotional Pig Latin.
mhm,
And it's up to us to feed ourselves a healthier language, so that we're not talking in Pig Latin anymore. We're more discerning. We understand that people who taught us that were in pain themselves,
mhm.
because happy campers don't speak in Pig Latin.
Do you think there's a reluctance to move things toward things that make yourself happy, because people think that being happy is somehow a detriment, or it's not, like there's no permission structure in some people's DNA to be happy, because they've kind of been told that that's not the way, that somehow you don't deserve to be happy.
I don't know. That's an interesting thought. I think that people have a hard time being happy if they tell themselves things that are really unhealthy. Because we often tell ourselves things that we would never tell anybody else, would never speak to anybody the way that we speak to ourselves. People are often not their own best friend. And your relationship with yourself is the longest relationship you'll ever have in your life. And a lot of times people treat themselves not like a fragile egg, but like hard boiled, and like that we don't have feelings. So what I one exercise that I have in my book is, let's write down the negative things that you tell yourself and how you talk to yourself. We'll say my old examples: I'm a loser, I won't make anything of myself, I should be farther along in my life by now. Okay, or I screwed up my marriage, or whatever self-downing things. I said, now imagine one of your favorite people, a person you really admire and that you really love. So someone imagines that. I said, what happens if that person said those exact words to you? Would you agree with them? And maybe had the same behaviors and the reasons why they said that. And they said, oh, no, I'd be reassuring, I'd be supportive. And I said, well, why don't you do that for yourself? But it's almost like I'm not worth it.
Mhm.
But a lot of people don't even know that, wait a minute, maybe I am more harsh on myself than I should be. But being your own best friend is actually very important.
Well, self-care seems to be something some people maybe think it's not on the table, because it's like to being too arrogant, or like presumptuous, say, oh, you can't do that for yourself, because like then that makes you whatever, this type of person or that. They don't see themselves in uh being worthy of that, like you're saying.
Well, it's interesting. that I've had many clients, particularly women, that think that if they're self-nurturing and not critical of themselves, then they're being conceited
Mm,
or they're being selfish. So it's almost like they have to be hard on themselves because otherwise they'd be selfish if they're too self-loving. I do coaching with a few people, and this woman just a few weeks ago said that to me. She said,
mm,
"Well, wouldn't that be selfish if I keep on patting myself on the back and encouraging myself and whatever?" I said, "No, self-love is not selfish." But I'm thinking of another client that said to me once that she wanted to be like her grandmother because her grandmother was such a martyr. She
mm.
was so selfless. The problem is that she was running into all sorts of problems with her marriage and with her kids because she so much wanted to be selfless that she ended up being resentful and ended up not handling things well.
Yeah, because it's like they end up being in that situation where people pleaser, but then eventually you hit the max, you hit your overload, and then suddenly people wonder why you're resentful because you've been the people pleaser for 20 years,
Right. What's happened to you? You've
but
changed.
now suddenly you want something, but you never wanted anything before.
Yeah. I liken self-care to the flight attendant who says, when you are with young children on an airplane, put your mask on first. And that's really such a good visualization for self-care. I'm into visualizations. I love metaphors because
Mhm,
metaphors can really get you unstuck. For example, people think that stress is bad for them because, like, if I'm in a live presentation, I said, stress is blank. How would you answer that? People say terrible, exhausting, overwhelming, too much to do, too little time. Very few people would say matter of life, exhilarating, meaningful, challenging. But how about getting married? How about having a child? How about going on vacation? How about getting a promotion? All stressful. Stress is not a bad thing. It's just to be managed instead of carried.
mhm. It's like being in it, if you're in a kind of flow state in the moment present, like I'm into jazz, and it's not stressful to not know exactly what's gonna happen, to me. But some people would find that to be stressful. I mean, being on stage itself could be like the anxiousness of getting there, but once you're there, then you kind of get in the zone. So up to that point, like the act of doing it, there's a stress level to get to that stage. Then
Well,
once you get in the zone, then you seem to be okay. But like,
some people aren't. Let's say you're going into a meeting or you're going to present something at a meeting. Some people, their hearts are racing and thumping because they're thinking, oh, I don't want to say anything stupid. It would be terrible if I say something stupid.
mhm,
They might talk themselves into a tizzy and they might end up stumbling with their words or not speaking up in a meeting because I don't want to sound stupid. So it doesn't always happen that it's a happy ending. Sometimes our thoughts can really limit our ability to succeed.
and those thoughts are just thinking about all the bad things that could happen rather than the potential, like, opportunities that could happen.
I agree with you. I think the important thing is to have trust that no matter what happens, you have a sense of humor, you have a sense of objectivity, and you learn from it and you move on.
It's almost like you have to have you start to have a toolkit of like how you deal with the things you don't expect, like an athlete that practices for that play. If that
Exactly.
play doesn't go exactly the way they want, they still respond, or maybe they don't, maybe they freeze up. But the
Right.
ones who are more agile, even though they didn't have everything in the playbook for that moment, they didn't fall down in the moment.
Right. So to continue my thing about stress is that I like metaphors and visualizations to remind us of the importance of being engaged and involved. instead of avoiding stress. So that would be an example of a rubber band. If a rubber band is stretched too much, it's going to break. But if it's not stretched at all, it would be limp and it wouldn't have any form or function. So you just want enough stretch so that there's some tension, but not too much and not too little. So just imagine a guitar or a string instrument. If you tighten the key too much, the string will snap. But if you don't tighten it enough, it's going to drone. So to make beautiful music, you have to have the right amount of stress without too much and too little. So that's a great example of a metaphor. And I actually have people make metaphorical toolkits sometime. I have that in my book where they assemble things from even around the house that represent things that healthy thoughts. So
Yeah.
let's say a Hershey kiss could remind you of self-love, for example, and self-kindness. And a cotton ball or a cotton swab can remind us to be gentle with ourselves and the importance of kindness. We could have, like, you go to a dollar store. I did that with my kids when they were younger. I had them pick out things that represented things of what made them feel good. And like one of them picked out a soldier because that reminds me to be brave, even when things are uncertain.
Mm-hmm.
So some people would keep their metaphorical toolkits in their kitchen or, on their dining room table or whatever, just to remind themselves of some healthy thinking skills.
But it seems like a lot of times, I always bring up, being an athlete or a musician is like practice. So what you seem to be talking about is like these toolkits, cards, your book is there's a certain level of practice or repetition and to going into these things that you need to actually do. And a lot of times people don't actually prepare in that way for their life because they don't realize like it's the same rigor that you have to practice for anything.
Because
Maybe
they have the
that.
cognitive distortion that I should not know this already. I remember like people sometime would get annoyed with me when I would pull a worksheet out that I gave them 6 months before. And they thought like, oh, like, I can't believe I still can't do this, like maybe teasing out a thought from a feeling, for example. And I say, this is not a one and done. When you want to get physically fit, you don't go to the gym once and expect you're going to be fit the rest of your life. You have to keep on working at it, and consistency. It's the same thing with our mental fitness. We need to keep on practicing. And that's the beauty of CBT. They have different logs and different diaries and different exercises that you can fill out. And so I recommend people get my book. It's in a workbook form. It's
Mm-hmm.
like 9 by 12, I think, something like that. And you can Xerox it and have enough copies so you keep on revisiting the same thing. Because if you fill out one time, then that means you just learn that lesson. No, we need, just like physical fitness, we need a lot of reinforcement, and we need
Repetition,
to keep on doing it.
rehearsal. It's like you don't learn something. As a musician, like I get 10,000 hours on my bass, so I don't have to look at the strings. I don't have to look at the net. Probably more than that. But
Right.
like once you get it, then there's certain. But I still have things I can learn. There's still new techniques, new genres, new things that pop up, and so I don't know everything. So you're still, even though I'm 57, I still rehearse.
So
Right?
our mental health requires a lot of practice. And a lot of people don't realize that. And I think that's the beauty of CBT. When people would come to me, and I wasn't just a CBT therapist, this is the subject of this book. I've written a lot of books, but I've always incorporated CBT principles. I want to make sure I give people tools so they can help themselves. It's like what is it? You give someone a fish, they eat for a day, but you teach them how to fish, they can eat for a lifetime.
Yeah,
So
you have the way to sustain them, so it's sustainable. You're building the sustainability and kind of do it yourself.
exactly.
A
A lot of times people think I should already know this already. But so a lot of times with my clients, I would have a worksheet that I would give them because I have an array of worksheets and handouts. Many are in that book. Um, and I would have them fill it out and come back. And then we would go over it. And then I would say, okay, I'd like you to do this again this week. And so, like at the end of, there's 11 chapters. At the end of each, actually 10 chapters, 11 items, tips in each chapter. At the end of each chapter is a self-test that I encourage the readers to do at different times and compare themselves with their other scores of the other topic chapters, because this is all about evolving. This isn't like, how good am I at managing stress? Sometimes you'll be better than others. But it serves as a reminder of what's important in terms of managing stress.
Yeah, it's like a spectrum. I mean, like, you're not always going to be perfect at everything, but if like people want to be like one and done, they want to do something real quick, and we're in a kind of this age of instant gratification. Don't realize that sometimes there's a sustainability
You
to
have
your
to work
life.
at it. Have to
Yeah,
work.
you got to work at it. Like
Well,
if you're do a diet, you're probably going to be off that diet. If you find a way to sustainably eat healthy, and it becomes something that's like breathing, it's
right.
not going to be hard because you're going to keep on doing the right thing.
A lifestyle rather than you starve yourself and then you go off and it's like, what the hell? I've already, had
Going
one.
up and down instead of being regulated. Like if you can stay in the same like area, right? If you're not going to going wildly up and down, if you can stay in a range that's healthy, then you okay. Then you found the kind of path. But it's hard to find that path. It might be, and you might always be perfect on that path. You might go off and eat something that wasn't on your list, right? But that doesn't mean you fell off the wagon. Like that's what it is.
Well, it brings to mind two things. One is that sometimes we need to take the wrong turn to get to the right place. And a lot of times we think we already know what's good for us, but sometimes we really don't. And we need to experience and make some wrong choices or choices, and then in retrospect, you wouldn't have made, so that you can evolve to the right choices. And the other thing is never, ever, ever be afraid of failure, because failure is probably the best opportunity for growth and learning. And in my book, there's actually, I think, a couple different tips on failing and the success of failures, because most, even inventions like Scotchgard is an example, that was a mistake in a lab.
We call it happy accidents. Like in tech, we go through iterations, and a lot of times in our iterations, we end up with a happy accident that ends up being something that's not even in the plan.
Oh, wow.
And it ends up being better than what was in the plan. And a lot of times when in our design sessions, we discover that if we allow those to be kind of free form design efforts and we let everybody kind of participate, that we get innovation because we allow that kind of open thinking where people are allowed to throw something at the wall and not get dinged for it. Right. And so if you allow people to do that, well, sometimes you'll go off, they'll go down the rabbit hole, but sometimes that rabbit hole is okay. Right. And so it's a different type of thinking that people want to be more sequential. They want to know what the outcome is, but sometimes you don't always know what the outcome is going to be.
No. And sometimes, like I said, the wrong turns, the failures can bring you to the right place. So I have in my book, successful failures. Almost anybody famous has failed. Abraham Lincoln he lost his farm. He lost this. He went bankrupt even back then. Oprah Winfrey was fired from her first job. Steve Jobs, talked in his Stanford commencement speech, which you can find on YouTube. It's a fabulous speech. The importance of failure when he was kicked out of Apple. The company that he founded, he was kicked out. Yeah, and how that was the time that he had the most growth, When he failed, he said, I felt like I failed my generation. And then he decided, I love what I did, and I was going to keep on going. And that turned into the most productive time of his life. He developed Pixar animation. He developed the iPhone. He got married to this woman who he met during that time after he was out of Apple. Walt Disney was fired from his job. He had a company then called, I think it was Laugh-O-Grams or something, and that went bankrupt. So a lot of people who succeeded have a lot of history of failure. And Thomas Edison said, I didn't fail 1,000, 10,000 times. I forget what the quote exactly is. In doing a light bulb, I found ways that didn't work.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's where a lot of people make the mistake of not letting things, hit the if you just throw it at the board. A lot of people are so scared to throw it at the board because they don't think they want that thing to be perfect. But a lot of times, like if you just put it into the world, then like the law of attraction, a lot of times things will just find a path. But people are so scared of that initial reaction. The initial reaction to anything that's outside of a canon, right? That anything that's like innovative is usually not that great. Right? Most people don't like that thing that's innovative. The first time they see it, they don't want it.
It's interesting that this you mentioned the word perfect a few times, and a lot of people seek perfection, and that's a setup for misery, because that is all or nothing thinking. I have to be perfect or I'm nothing. Just like that woman who said, I'd have this many failures. She was such a perfectionist because she did not believe in herself. So I always say to people, strive to be authentic, not perfect. When you strive to be authentic, you are you. You are the best you. And of all the trillions and megatrillions of cells that combinations, it's a miracle that you are you, and be the best you that you can be without the shoulds, but just to be the most authentic.
Well, the vulnerability of your authentic self, like that is the secret sauce. To me, what I've always seen is the innovators, in music are always the people, the Dylans, the Hendrixes, the Beatles is like people who pushed the envelope and did things that weren't expected. And usually they wasn't commercially viable initially, but
Mhm.
it's something that you just had to do because it was coming from your inner self, that thing that you put out there, and that's what worth it. It's like the cathartic nature of doing the art. You do it because it's that expressing that vulnerability and putting it into the world is the initial benefit. If you get money from it, that's gravy. But it just putting it in the world, that process, it usually brings the artist joy in the effort itself.
Wow. Good. That's great. I agree with you. Awesome.
But the thought distortions we've been talking about, they're like the root cause of a lot of the issues that people have, right? From what we've been talking about.
Well, the root cause actually is called the core beliefs. That's another example of a CBT technique. Identify your core belief, because let's say, take the situation I mentioned before of being afraid of speaking up at a meeting. You might be thinking, oh, I don't want to sound stupid. I don't want people to laugh at me, and I don't want to say something wrong or whatever. So you're going to be, I want people to like me. I want people to respect me. But I'm afraid that if I say something off, then they're going to remember that. They're not going to like me as much or whatever. All those thoughts are based on a core belief. So what I would do with a client is this technique. It's called digging down to your core beliefs. So if someone says, well, I hate to say something stupid. I said, well, if you did, what would that mean to you? It would mean that other people are smarter than me. Okay, if that was true, what would that mean? It would mean other people are better than me. Okay, if that was true, what would that mean? It would mean that I'm inadequate as a person. Okay, if that was true, what does that mean? Then I'm worthless. The core belief is I'm not enough. I'm worthless. I'm not special. But so many times people get distracted by their anxiety and all their anxious surface thoughts. They don't get to their core beliefs by asking themselves, okay, if that was true, what would that mean? So it's a good exercise to do because usually people only have a couple core beliefs, but thousands and thousands of negative thoughts.
So in that situation, that person feels like they have to be like at the top or winning in every situation. If they're not winning, they're not valid.
Exactly. That's perfectionism. Perfectionism is going to rob you of a lot of joy in life.
Because you're not able to sit with your, you walk in a room, like you might not be the expert at X, Y, Z, but you could still be in that room. But they're thinking they can't even be in a room.
Right. It's like it would be terrible if I didn't measure up rather than hopefully I'll learn from it, even if I don't sound as smart as other people. And I'm a work in progress. So it's all about self compassion, being self forgiving, and not comparing yourself to others the way you should be.
Hmm. Leaving room for growth, because knowing that, like, as every student that goes to school, like, you don't know at the beginning of the semester. There's no way what everything, right? There's no way you could.
Right.
So there's always room to grow, and you might not be the top student in that class, right? But it's like maybe you're only going to get a B.
You
Maybe
don't you
you're
don't only a B or only a C or whatever. Where our self-worth is not based on grading ourselves. And just imagine that you have a $20 bill. I used to use that as a in my presentations and or any denomination. And I'd say, okay, don't rip it up. I want to use it later, but do whatever you want with it. So people would crumble it and then unfold it and then step on it. And then it came back to me. It's all crumbled. I undo it. I said, how much is it worth now? Still $20. And a lot of times people don't realize when they've been stepped on and crushed and increased and whatever, they think they're less worthy. But I say, you're actually just as worthy as the day you were born because no one thinks a newborn is worthless. It's
Mhm.
only life lessons we learn as time goes on that we didn't make the mark as much as we thought we would or other people thought.
Yeah, it's like those expectations sometimes made for us, or we feel we have to meet them.
Exactly.
But then being okay with yourself, that's a hard place to be for some folks. It's
Well,
hard.
I say that self compassion is the new self esteem. People used to think that people feel good about themselves if they achieve a success or they're better than average. Well, what happens to the bottom half of the class?
Hmm.
Into feeling like failures? No. A lot of people who were not top in their class are very happy. So
Yeah, you
the
don't want to. It's like, how's the overall society going to function if only the top performers are valid?
exactly.
So
And
it's
sometimes you might be top in one ways and not at the bottom in another way. So it's very important to not define yourself by successes and failures. Not saying that you don't try to do as well as you can,
Mhm.
but developing the art of self compassion is really going to make the difference.
Yeah, I would like to probably end on it. Like, it's a ongoing thing that you have to continually do, and it's almost like you're never really done. You're always improving. There's always room.
I hope not, because as you're living, there's always room for growth.
So I want to probably end on that note, and thank you for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast. And we do have your BelmontWellness.com. I want to let people know that's fully clickable. If people click on that, what do they find there?
Yep. And people will find handouts, worksheets. They're all free, downloadable resources to give you a taste of some life skills learning. And also, you can visit my author page on Amazon.
Oh, on Amazon, okay.
Yep.
Where they can get to that from there, or they can just go to Amazon?
Well,
Okay.
go to Belmont Wellness. You see all my resources there, but I have a lot of my videos, podcast shorts like this. I will put that on my website. But also Amazon. I can't put those videos on Amazon, but they do have my author page on there.
Oh, great. I want to let people know that, again, that's fully clickable. We've just been live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We'll be on all the other podcast platforms where you can listen to or watch a podcast by tomorrow. And I want to thank you for being a guest on the Family Electric Goes
Well,
podcast.
thank you for having me. I enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you.